Let me share. Okay. I trust you are. So let me get rid of this. All right, can you see my screen, all of you?
Yes, I can.
All right, as this you can. What about the rest? I don't know what.
Yes, we can see you.
Uh,
Thank you.
oh, Shabina, can you see the screen?
Yes, Sheikh, I can see. We all
All
can
right,
see.
good. All right, okay. So let's continue our uh, contemplation on the ideas reached us from the ancient Greek. I hope before I start these sessions, I hope you have studied the paper which I shared with you. What I would want you to do is, as I have mentioned in my message to you, write your own comments on whatever I upload and share your comments in the discussion forum. And by doing that, enter into some sort of critical dialogue with your peers. This is something which is part of this class. So later on, I myself would upload my own comments. And in the meantime, if you have any queries and questions, you can email it to me, or you can bring it here in the class. I hope you have not forgotten what we discussed last week. Basically, what I told you was that the philosophical quest for the ancient Greeks was directed towards cosmological problems. And by the way, cosmological problems are still the backbone of all philosophical reflections and deliberations. For the Greeks, cosmological issue had three components. On the one hand, they were interested in finding out what was the basic constituent part or element which was responsible for creating the whole realm of being. So the problem of origin and the problem of the constituent part of the realm of being. The second question was whether or not there is a God. And a third question was assuming that there is an order in the cosmos, and that order applies a force, which is the force of justice, to everything. Justice itself bring about order. Then what should human beings do with respect to that cosmic force? On occasions, that trend of thought would encourage individuals to take heed of that cosmic force and try to, if you like, align themselves with that force in their own personal and social life. We remember, you remember we went through the ideas of the Ionians, Milesians, then we discussed Pythagoreans, and then we discussed the two major figures of the Elegiac school, Parmenides and Zeno of Elea. And each one of these philosophers approached those three basic questions from a different angle, from a particular angle. And together, they presented to us a spectrum of interesting ideas. Now we are going to complete that spectrum in today's session, and then inshallah we will continue our discussion, move on to Socratic philosophers and post-Socratic philosophers. Heraclitus was from the city of Ephesus. This is the city of Ephesus near Miletus, and part of the ancient Greece. Let me just see whether I can get rid of these. Like Parmenides, he also was a very, very influential figure. And by that, what I mean is that his views have reached us and is still pretty influential. We will see during the course of this history of thought that how Parmenides and Heraclitus were two very substantive figures in the history of ancient philosophical ideas. His views, however, was in complete opposite to the views of Parmenides. Remember, Parmenides was saying that there is no change. All changes are illusory. And he was saying that there is just one immutable entity which does not accept any sort of alteration or change. Heraclitus, on the other hand, went to the completely opposite direction. He suggested a very revolutionary idea, which seems to be closer to our common sense, and I'll discuss it with you. But before sharing that, remember I told you that there were people in the ancient Greece who were monists, and monists were those who maintained that there is just one constituent part which has created the whole realm of being. And there were pluralists. Heraclitus belonged to the monists camp, and he maintained that final element of which everything else has originated was fire. And fire would take different shapes, and in taking those different shapes, it gives rise to different elements or different entities in the realm of being. You also may remember that I talk about those who were subscribing to another theory, which was called the two-aspect theory. And Pythagoreans were a representative of this two-aspect theory. Heraclitus also developed a two-aspect theory, but completely independent of Pythagoreans and completely different from them and from their approach. His basic thesis was that in the realm of being, everything is subject to change. So everything changes to the extent that nothing remains the same. And you may have heard this. He was saying that in a river, you cannot swim twice, because by the time you entered into that river, all water molecules and everything in the environment have changed. Therefore, it is not the same river. in yourself also there have been changes, so you have not remained the same person. So he introduced this element of in this important point that in nature everything is in a state of flux. Everything is constantly changing, and this is a very important idea. From here, he came to another again revolutionary long-lasting idea, and that was the point that there is order in the universe, and that order should be regarded as a uniformity of change. So although there is change, but you can discern uniformity in change. So for example, you notice that the sun rises every day and apparently moves along the sky and then disappears. So there is change. But tomorrow again, the same sun rises, or if not the same sun, the sun rises again and moves along the sky and then disappears. And this circle of change repeats itself in a uniform manner. So this close uniformity of nature was used by many philosophers, both in Islamic civilization and in Western civilization. And they based a mode of thinking on this very principle. And that mode of thinking is the inductive mode of reasoning. You're all familiar with the inductive mode of reasoning. Induction means moving from a limited number of samples to a generalized idea about all instances of those samples. So it is a bottom-up approach. You come across a few examples of something, and then you jump to the conclusion that, sorry, you come to the conclusion that all samples of that entity which you have come across follow the same pattern. But to jump ahead of ourselves, let me tell you that in the 20th century, it was shown conclusively, in my view, that inductive mode of reasoning is not only not valid, but it is also impossible, despite the fact that still in many books on methodology, they talk about inductive mode of thinking, and many scientists mistakenly think that what they are doing is an inductive approach to nature. But I would like to tell you, and then later on we will discuss this at some length, that inductive mode of reasoning is not valid and should not be approached, should not be used. You do not need to use it because it is completely false and actually, as I mentioned, impossible. But that is for a later story. Now, what Heraclitus did was to give a name to that force which bring about uniformity of nature. And he called it, he called it logos. The term logos is the one from which you get logic, and it means word, discourse, and rational state of rational statements, and also rational state of mind. in Bible, it begins by, at the beginning, there was the word. So that is exactly the same as logos. So logos was a cosmic force which was responsible for bringing rational order into the chaos, which is the natural outcome of any change. If there is a change and that change is not following a rational pattern, then you will end up facing a chaotic situation. So Heraclitus introduced these both aspects. On the one hand, there is change, which is prone to produce chaotic situations. And on the other hand, there is this element of order, which is produced by this cosmic force, which is called logos. And this idea of logos was used by the subsequent philosophers, both in the West and in the Islamic world. And they try to make a whole, if you like, theological frame out of it. We will discuss all these in later sessions. So logos, as I mentioned, is responsible for the order, rational order in nature. Now, Heraclitus introduced a third notion, which is coming out of a collaboration between change and, if you like, order, stability. Order always goes hand in hand with some sort of stability. And that notion was the notion of becoming. This is, again, another important notion which has survived its usefulness until now. We are using it, and many great philosophers in the past have been very fond of it. So Heraclitus was responsible for all these important ideas. So becoming is the intermediary between nothing and between a fully fledged being. So from nothing to a fully fledged being, this intermediary state of becoming plays an important role and acts as a bridge between the two. Now, based upon these three ideas, he suggested that everything, just note that nothingness and being are contradictory, okay? And becoming connects these two together. Based upon this mental image, Heraclitus suggested that everything in the realm of reality consists of these two contradictory aspects. Of course, he did not mean this claim to be taken in a very strict logical sense. It was mostly metaphorical and poetical. So, for example, he was saying things like this, that God is day, night, winter, summer, war, peace, satiety, hunger. As you can notice, it is not a strict contradictory aspects, because something could be, some season could be winter, nature could face winter at some time and then summer at some other time. So winter, summer represent two different aspects of the same entity. What he had in mind was this. And again, it is another saying of him. He was saying that at the same time, thing in us is living and dead, working, sleeping, waking, sleeping, young and old. For these things having changed around us are those, and conversely, those having changed around us are these. This particular aspect of Heraclitus' ideas, i.e., contradictory aspects in different things, was taken up by Hegel in 19th century. And out of this idea and the idea of constant change, he developed a fully fledged dialectical logic. We will discuss this dialectical logic and we'll see whether Hegelian dialectical logic can pass the tests of validity, the strict tests of logical validity. Okay, let's move on to another school of thought, which are the atomists. Now, the most important, better known atomist was the Democritus. Democritus was from this town of Abderia, which was the coast of Thrace, and it is a region between Turkey, Bulgaria, and Greece. He took a completely novel approach towards the cosmological problem. He said that everything is made of atoms. An atom, by definition, means something which cannot be divided, cannot be cracked. It is indivisible. It is a whole which cannot be taken into part. It does not have any part. And he said that whatever is there is being made out of the combinations of different types and shapes of atoms. So what there is just different types of atoms which are moving, actually falling down in a field of void. So there is void, nothingness, which presents some sort of empty space. And there are different types of atoms. And atoms fall, and in their random movement, they hit each other, and they have got hooks, so they combine with each other, and their combination give rise to different types of entities. So that was the basic idea of the atomists. Now, because atomists maintain that there are two basic things, i.e. void and atoms, you can regard them as dualists with respect to basic constituent parts of nature. On the other hand, because he was of the view that there is just atoms which are substantive and their combination produce things, you may regard him as a monist. And from a third point of view, because he was saying that there are different types of atoms, different types, shapes of atoms, you may regard him as a pluralist. So depending on what part of his views you want to take and interpret, he may be regarded as a dualist, as a monist, and as a pluralist. Okay. Democritus' teacher was a guy whose name was Lysippus, but of this guy we don't know almost anything, save a number of sayings which has survived him. He has said things like this: nothing happens by chance, everything happened by law and necessity. Now, note that this is a very important claim, because this claim introduces yet another important notion into the history of thought. And that notion is the notion of determinism. It is a deterministic metaphysics, a universe which is based upon deterministic action of its constituent parts. Now, determinism should be compared with the opposite idea, which is indeterminism. So in the 20th century, when quantum mechanics was introduced, many of those who were the pioneer of this field came to the conclusion that determinism is a bankrupted metaphysics, and our universe is actually indeterministic. And as you can imagine, in an indeterministic and in a deterministic universe, there are many different problems which would arise and need to be answered. For example, in a deterministic universe, the question arises that, is there any room for human free will? If everything is predetermined along a strict predetermined laws, then is there a room for free will of the humans? And in an indeterministic universe, the question which come to mind, one of the questions which come to mind is that if everything is indeterminate, then how can we talk about any causal order? Because nothing comes from anything else. It is indeterminate. So these are, again, as you can imagine, important philosophical issues which are related to the universe, to the cosmos, and also are dealt with in physics. So there is this close connection between physics and metaphysics, which is still with us. No science can breathe in a metaphysical vacuum. No science, no type of knowledge. Now, determinism became a very important part of history of thought. It gave rise to the mechanistic worldview, which was developed in at the end of Renaissance onward, 16th, 17th century, by people like René Descartes and Isaac Newton. And also, it gave rise to some sort of materialistic worldview. So as you can see, although these views were presented 2,500 years ago, they are still reverberating with us. They are still of utmost importance. And we are still trying to further and further explore the potentials latent in these ideas. Okay. Now, Democritus also maintained that, or he was a materialist, and he maintained that matter is just made of atoms, and atoms are everlasting. They do not annihilate. They just integrate and disintegrate. That's it. And when they integrate, they give rise to some entity. And when they disintegrate, that entity comes to its end. Now, he developed this into the a story about human beings. And he suggested that, although he was a materialist, he suggested that human beings also possess souls, and their souls is also just like anything else made of atoms. The only difference is that the atoms of their souls are much more refined the atoms of other ordinary entities. So this is a theory about soul, psychological theory. He also made the difference between appearances and reality in itself much sharper. Note that atoms are not visible. So he had made a conjecture about something unobservable out of which the observable realm has emerged. Whereas, for example, in the case of Heraclitus, who was subscribing to the notion of fire, fire has some sort of materialistic manifestation. Or Ptolemy, who maintained in the substance of water, or his student, Anaximenes, who believed that everything is made of air. These are things which are tangible, whereas atoms are intangible and are unobservable, and yet, by positing something unobservable, he was able to construct a story about observable realm. Now, this pattern of explanation is a very, very important pattern which has been inherited by us. Nowadays, almost all explanations in science moves along the same line. We posit something which is unobservable and try by attributing some sort of power to those unobservable entities, explain what is going on at the observable level, at the level of appearances. Sorry, could you please mute your phone, because mute your mics, because your voice is being shared in the class. Okay. All right. Let's move on to another of the pre-Socratic philosophers. Empedocles was born in Sicily, in part of Italy, and of him a number of poems have survived, and he also made something of interesting contribution to the ideas posed by philosophers prior to him and by the poets prior to all of them. And that is ideas about those three aspects of cosmological questions. So with respect to the first part, i.e. the constituent elements of universe, he took a pluralistic approach and he said, cosmos is made of those four elements you are familiar with, i.e. earth, water, air, and fire. And each belong to a particular sphere. He didn't call them elements, he called them roots. But then later generations used the same model and further developed it and changed the term roots to term element. But of course, what they meant by element is not the same as what we mean by element in modern chemistry. The other thing which he contributed to philosophy and the history of thought was to introduce these two notions of life, love and hate. These were two cosmic forces, and upon the impact, influence of these two cosmic forces on the four elements, different things would create, including life and death. So he introduced a scenario in which two cosmic forces and four elements were constantly interacting with each other, and out of their interaction, some sort of cyclical universe would come to the fore. So let's see how his scenario can be further developed. He was saying that at the beginning, love was the upper hand, had the upper hand, and love was exerting a force of attraction. So it attracted all the four elements. But in a state of absolute love, where everything has stuck together, nothing changes. And if nothing changes, then nothing is developed. Note that he is not a Parmenidean. He is not thinking that there is one thing that and that thing is everything. No, he is a pluralist, and he was saying that cosmos is made of the collaboration between four different elements. Now, when love was exerting its maximum power, all elements in the universe would come together and coalesce and stick together.
حاجیان لندن دارن حرف میزنن. لندن الان 5:30 بعد از ظهر.
آقای دکتر پایا، شما به عنوان ادمین میتونین مایکشون رو خاموش کنین. اینا ظاهرا آقای حسین رفیعی نمیشنون.
بسیار. البته من خودم خوب بلد نیستم که چجوری میتونم مایکشون رو خاموش کنم. Let me see. Actually, Dr. Azhar should do this. Okay, I guess I better not waste time on that, because by the time I master that, we may lose a good deal of our session. Okay, so Empedocles was saying that when love is exerting its maximum force, nothing moves, so there is nothing alive. But then gradually, strife starts exerting its own force, strife or hate, and gradually and slowly separates the four elements with each other. So you can imagine that there are two states of, if you like, equilibrium between these two forces, these two cosmic forces, in which the two are almost equal and neither could force the other out of the scene. Under such a scenario, life would thrive and change could happen and things could grow, and life as we know it could take shape. But then gradually the force of strife or hate would become more and more powerful and exert more and more influence. And because it's a force of, if you like, repulsion, elements move away from each other and become detached, and nothing can interact with anything else. Again, it will be a scenario of death and destruction. So we are facing with a cosmic image in which there are two states of death and destruction, one due to absolute love, one due to absolute hatred, and two states of equilibrium, in which the two forces are more or less equal. So this was the view which Empedocles was suggesting to us and contributing to the history of thought. He was like Pythagoreans of the view that our souls, after one of those states of life, would go and enter into another type of arrangement of elements. So that again introduces that notion of cosmic justice. If an individual wanted to become more prosperous in his or her own later life, he or she should live a life according to the cosmic order of justice. Okay. So this is what I just mentioned. Parmenides' philosophy, remember I told you that Parmenides was being regarded as the granddad or the original thinker or originator of both materialism and idealism. Depending on how you interpret his philosophy, it could be ended up as a materialist or could be ended up as an idealist. The same goes with Empedocles, depending on how you interpret those two forces. If you interpret those two forces of love and hate teleologically, then he would be part of the camp of idealists or those who believe in the power of ideas. But if you interpret those two forces as purely material, then he would be the originator or part of the camp of materialism, in which blind forces are at work and there is no, if you like, pattern intellectually thought about by a final cause towards which all these things could move. So this very much depends on the way people have tended to interpret Empedocles. Okay. Now, if we take his views theologically, then it can be claimed that he has been one of the earliest Greek philosophers who provided a response for the second element of cosmological quest, i.e., whether or not there is a God in the whole order of being. Theologically speaking, that telos could be regarded as some sort of divine element which helps to give order to everything. But only if you take that type of interpretation of his ideas. Okay, let me take you to one other, because we have to cover many philosophers, so I'm sorry to rush you. Another philosopher, one of the last pre-Socratic philosophers, was Anaxagoras. This gentleman. from the town of Klazameni at the coast of Asia Minor. Like Empedocles, he was a pluralist, but his pluralism was different from the pluralism of Empedocles. He maintained that there are seeds of everything in everything, and different things are being made with different proportion of those seeds. Different types of seeds come together and give rise to a particular entity. With some sort of charitable interpretation, you may think of his theory of seeds somewhat like our modern genetic theory. Everything is made of genes, and there are different types of genes, and different types of genes help to create different types of entities. So that was his idea of creation, a pluralistic idea. However, his most important contribution to the history of thought was not this. His main contribution was the introduction of a very important new concept, and that was the concept of nous, some sort of cosmic mind. And this concept of nous, which you can compare with Heraclitus' concept of logos, had a long-lasting impact on the history of thought. It was used by subsequent philosophers both in Muslim communities and civilization and Western civilization. Now, nous was a mental force, and like human mind, his task was to bring rational order to everything. So remember Heraclitus and the notion of logos. Nous is also a cosmic force, and this cosmic force bring order. But whereas Heraclitus was, if you like, mostly of a materialistic bent of mind, Anaxagoras had, if you like, a theological attitude. So his nous would be regarded as another, if you like, attempt in order to introduce the notion of a universal God, a God who is responsible for the whole of the universe, wise, and act according to rational plans. Okay. So this, I guess, brings me to the end of pre-Socratic philosophers. After all those figures which we hastily touched upon some part of their views, surface aspects of their views, we come across a new breed of thinkers, the sophists, who were very intelligent, well-educated individuals, but were not at all interested in philosophy. Sophia means wisdom, and sophists were regarded as men of wisdom. But their wisdom was of, if you like, practical type. They were not at all interested in exploring cosmological issues. They were men of the world, and they were thinking that the most important thing in life is acquiring success, practical professional success. That was their aim. And they were using the power of their intellect in order to achieve that. Now, in that, they are completely different from philosophers prior to them. Those philosophers were trying to produce a metaphysical grounding for ethics, i.e., to link ethic to some sort of cosmic order, cosmic justice. Not so for the sophists. Sophists were not interested in that sort of metaphysical universal type of ethics. But they were also not interested in the notion of God. So problems, theological problem, the second aspect of cosmological problem. With respect to personal ethics, their ethics was completely relativistic. They were of the view that ethics or morality are based on conventions, and conventions would change from place to place, from time to time. So nothing written in a stone, nothing is permanent, and everything is relative to this individual, that community. So with respect to ethics, they were relativists. With respect to knowledge claims, they were also relativists. They did not believe in the notion of universal truth. Because of that, they were not interested in logic. Rather, they were interested in the art of oratory, rhetoric, and they were good rhetoricians. And what they would do, they would go from one place to another place and would teach the sons of rich aristocrats. Of course, they would get hefty fees for their teachings. And they would teach them, those aspiring young boys, how to become successful in life, how to win positions. Most of them wanted to become politicians, so sophists would teach them how to become successful politicians. And of course, that would boil down to just one thing: the power of oratory, the power of being able to convince your interlocutors. So that was their art. They were master of teaching people how to convince others. And on some occasions, they were even telling them that you may resort to force in order to elicit conviction out of people. Now, note that the difference between rhetoric and logic lies between the fact that logic is all based upon rational reasoning, all based upon rational reasoning, whereas rhetoric heavily relies on playing with emotions of your interlocutors. Because of that, using fallacies in lieu of proper arguments was one of the tools of the toolbox of the sophists. The term sophistry comes from that art, the art of using fallacious arguments in lieu of proper valid arguments. So they were master of doing that. And they were of the view that truth is also relative. There is no such a thing as universal truth. There is no such a thing as objective truth. All truth are subjective, and all truth are relative to this person or that person, or this community or that community. You can see, if you're familiar with, you can see the echoes of this way of thinking in modern, say, for example, postmodern philosophers. Postmodernism is heavily indebted to sophistic way of thinking. So, as I mentioned, the main concern was to gain success with hook or crook. That was the motto. Now, some of the influential sophists were Protagoras, Gorgias, and Thrasymachus. And these are things which could be regarded as their legacies. Protagoras famously said that man is the measure of all things. And this is a very, of course, his main word, the main wording of he was the following: of all things, the measure is man. And of the things that are, and of the things that are not, they are not. Now, this motto is a very, very, very important motto. This is actually the main motto of all relativist, postmodernist, all those many politicians subscribe to this. Gorgias famously said the following: nothing exists. If anything exists, it is incomprehensible. And even if it is comprehensible, it is incommunicable. So this means that we are in a limbo. We are not in a position to understand something universally and communicate it with each other. So what matters is to make progress in life by using practical means. Forget about using theories. Theory was anathema to the sophists. They were, as I mentioned, all men of activity, men of applied way of thinking. And Thrasymachus famously suggested that justice is the interest of the stronger. This is a very important claim. Later on, for example, in Islamic philosophy, you come across some version of this, the idea about God's justice, whether justice is something objective to which God himself abide and observe, or whether justice is something which God does. Whatever God does is just. So what he is saying is that whatever the stronger does out of his or her interest, that should be called justice. Okay, this brings us to the end of pre-Socratics. Let me quickly move on because we have got 1 hour. I can give you a few minutes for your questions if there is any. If not, we can move on. To the my other. Okay. All right, this is this. I'm in the second of this session. I'm going to take you quickly through three very important philosophers, three pillars of the ancient world: Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Okay.
Dr. Paya, Muhammad Jawad has got his hand up.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, please. I didn't see that. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you so much for bringing this to my attention.
So
Okay.
I just wanted to ask, in terms of the slides, because we haven't received them yet, were you able to send it to
Actually, I'm not quite sure whether I'm going to share it with you,
Okay.
because I'm going to work on this to publish it. So at this stage, they are not, if you like, well developed. So I rather not share it at this stage.
Okay.
But I can help you with plenty of references and resources, so that it would, if like, fill the gap you may feel from not receiving my slides.
Would you say that would be the reading list maybe that you've already shared?
I have given you one reading list, but each week I'll give you more reading lists,
Sure, thank you.
specifically tailored for each session. Okay, so I'm going to share with you a number of useful references for this particular session about Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle.
Thank you.
The one I gave you before was useful for that other session. However, if you may remember, I told you last week that there is this anthology by the name has escaped my mind. Walter Kaufman, which he has collected a very nice excerpts of different ancient philosophers until the end of 13th century. That book can be read free of charge on the Internet Archive. So you can get access to a copy of that book and read all the sections. I strongly recommend you to go and make yourself familiar with examples of writings of these philosophers. Because our sessions are too compact, I do not have time to take you through all those samples. However, I recommend strongly that you should go and make yourself familiar with what has remained of them, or what has reached to us through the writings of the subsequent writers, because most of what we have received from them may not be their direct writings, but what has reached us through the writings of, say, the like of Plato, Aristotle, or Socrates, and the rest.
Can you just mention the title of that book that we can get on the internet, please?
It is by Walter Kaufman. Kaufman, K-A-U double F F-A K-A-U-F, Kaufman, M-A-N-N. Yeah, man with double N. And it is called Philosophic Classics, or something like that. Yeah, Philosophic Classics. Okay.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, by all means, go ahead.
Yeah. Do you have good reason to believe that in this pre-Socrates era, that some of the earlier philosophers were inspired by prophets of the land and in that time? Because I can see, like in the Milesians, they had this unified theory that's kind of related to maybe Tawheed, and then later on, as time goes by, when you get to the surface, then they've kind of really strayed away from that. So what do you think of?
That is a very, very good question. That's a very good question. Researchers have done research on that, but there has been no evidence to suggest that there had been some sort of direct impact because of the differences of place and dates. And as you may know already, it is not, if you like, extraordinary or strange for similar ideas to emerge simultaneously in different parts of the world. This is something which is almost on a constant, continuous basis is happening, and it used to happen in the past. So you come across similar ideas in different great civilizations of the ancient world. And as you come closer to the present time, again, in different parts of the world, similar ideas have emerged. Because of this very interesting occurrence in the history of thought, in modern times, a very serious problem, the problem of priority of discovery, became a cornerstone of scientific debates. A famous case in point belongs to the discovery of integral and differential mathematics, calculus, by Newton and Leibniz. They came to the same idea simultaneously, but interestingly from two different angles. Leibniz geometrically, Newton physically, but came to the exactly same sort of conclusions with respect to calculus. But later on, you come across many, many, many more examples of simultaneous discovery, more or less simultaneous discovery. And because of that, it is not something strange. So the idea of a unified element or a unified cosmos was something which was entertained by many of ancients in different parts of the world, in different civilizations. Okay, let's move on. And I'm trying to get rid of this. I can't, sorry. Now, Socrates, born to a stone worker and a midwife. And this notion of midwifery is important because he called himself doing exactly this, helping people as a midwife to take out the ideas with which they have been impregnated or they were struggling to take it out. So this was his task. He was a wandering sort of philosopher. He used to walk in bazaars and in marketplaces and talk to people. So he was what we nowadays call an oral philosopher. He did not write anything. Whatever which is written in his name was written by Plato. Some of those works which has reached us by Plato could be generally attributed to the teachings of Socrates himself. But as Plato became more and more mature in his own thought, he just used the name Socrates as a front to introduce his own original thoughts. When we come to Plato, we will discuss this. So Socrates.
Sorry to interrupt you. Have
Yeah,
you
go ahead.
moved on to a slide further from the three influential sophists? Because it's stuck on those on your slide, the screen
Come
you are
again?
sharing.
On my screen, it is moving. Can't you see the
All right.
change?
I can't see it. Maybe the others can.
No, it's stuck on the three influential sophists.
Yeah, same for me.
Oh, really? Okay, okay, sorry about that. Sorry about that. Let me just end
No
this.
problem.
Dr. Paya, on the side, yours is on the same as well. It's highlighted as slide 45, which is three influential sophists.
Slide 45. Okay, let me just get rid of that completely. Let me just go back and see. Okay, let me get rid of this. All right. Are we okay? Let me share this one with you. I guess you can see this now.
Yes.
All
Thank
right,
you.
good. Okay, this is good. All right. I told you that Socrates was born and died in Athens. His dad was a stoneworker and his mom was a midwife. He didn't write anything at all philosophically. He was an oral philosopher. And what we have got from him are written by others about him, attributed to him. His interest was not epistemological and was also not ontological. He was mostly a philosopher of ethics, and to some lesser extent, to the extent that ethics and politics are related, he could be said to be a philosopher of politics as well. But he is mostly known to be a moral philosopher, and his teachings were mostly in the realm of morality and ethics. And in that realm, he has said something of great value of originality. Okay. In ancient thought, as you remember from the first session, there was a close connection between the cosmos, which was the realm of being, then human beings, which were living in this world, and in between, there were city-states, polis. And the ancient Greeks maintained that there is a close connection between all three, and the same sort of order goes through the three, and justice and harmony could be preserved in all three realms. The realm of cosmos, and the realm of city-states, and the realm of the life of human beings. Then the idea, we will see mostly this in Aristotle, the idea was developed that actually human beings cannot thrive outside city-states. So city-states are a vehicle for us to be able to develop all our potential. In the absence of attachment to a community, human beings will not be able to become proper human beings. So humanity very much depended on being a member of community. Especially, the most important community was a city-state. Now, Socrates was a member of one of the most important of these city-states, Athens. And as I said, his main concern was morality, and he was trying to find about general moral principles, and he wanted to teach people about nitty-gritty of how to live, if you like, respectful moral life. So that was his mission. The sort of system of ethics which he developed was based upon enhancing people's virtues. And virtues were different types of skills which people would possess and were supposed to develop during the course of their lives. And Aristotle was trying to bring to their attention the importance of those virtues and the fact that how those virtues could be further enhanced and further developed. Okay. He was of the view that people are all virtuous and moral, but they are not aware of this fact. And because they are ignorant, they go wrong. So if they become knowledgeable about virtues and the sphere of morality, they will always act accordingly. So because of this, his mission in life was to help people to become knowledgeable about nitty-gritties of a moral life. In order to do this, he introduced this method of dialectic. Now, this term dialectic is one of those unfortunate terms because different philosophers have used it differently. Plato, who was a disciple of Socrates, also uses this term, but it gives it another important meaning and another important dimension, which is completely different and alien to Socrates. Then in 19th century, Hegel uses this term and applies this to his own system of philosophy, again different from what Socrates and Plato were thinking of and were using dialectic in those terms. Then Hegel's disciple Marx also used the same term, but gave it another meaning, which was alien to Hegel himself. So when you come across this term dialectic, you should be very careful not to, if you like, fall into the trap of equivocation, i.e. attaching different meaning to the same word and using it in different contexts mistakenly. Now, for Socrates, dialectical method based upon a series of questions and answers. So he would ask experts who would claim that they know something as a professional, that to teach him about the very meaning of their profession, the very meaning of their expertise. By the way, Athenians used to go and consult with some fortune tellers who were in the temple of Delphi and asking them about the future of their lives or how should they do about their everyday decision makings and so on and so forth. Just like what people in Islamic land go to the Quran and do some sort of tafa'ul, they would go to those fortune tellers and would ask them. They were muses who were supposed to be in touch with the gods on the Mount Olympus. And somebody went to these future tellers, fortune tellers, and asked them, who is the wisest man in Athens? And the Muses told him that the wisest man in Athens is Socrates. And then Socrates said that I know that I am not a wise man at all. Actually, I am the most ignorant man. But if I am the most wise man in the eyes of the gods, then what about others who claim to be experts? So he decided to show those who think that they were experts that they were actually not experts at all, and they needed to be more humble. For that reason, they were not calling himself only a midwife and was doing the act of midwifery. He was calling himself a gadfly as well, who would go and sting people and bring them to their senses. So he would ask people about their expertise, field of expertise, and by asking more and more and more and more probing questions, would force them to admit that their knowledge of what they claim to be knowledgeable of has been very superficial. Now, all these are in the early dialogues produced by Plato, and I strongly recommend to you to go and read some of them. Again, in that anthology by Kaufman, you find it. Plato was a brilliant writer, and you find those dialogues very educational. Of course, whatever you read and whatever you hear, including from me, you should take all with a critical attitude. With always keep your critical hat on, and try to be, if you like, with a frame of mind that you do not take anything for granted. So a bit of skepticism about what you read, but I can assure you that when you go and read those texts, you will enjoy reading it as both a literary text and, of course, a text of wisdom. So in doing so, Socrates was trying to help them to see different angles of the same problem and not only become modest and shed all the pretensions, become aware of the fact that they need to go out of their way and learn. So they are not at all, if you like, free from being taught. And he himself was trying to teach them, although in many of the dialogues, when they were discussing different issues, collectively they may come to the conclusion that the understanding of the whole assembly has not been enough to further explore the shades of meaning behind the concepts which were being discussed. Now, an important methodological point which I like to share with you is that Socrates and then Plato and then Aristotle were all interested in definitions. They were of the view that definitions capture the essence of things, be those things something non-tangible, non-material, or something material and tangible. So their philosophies are all geared towards finding definitions. One of the changes which has taken place in the 20th century and now 21st century is that at least some of us have learned and have taught the fact that definitions are of no use at all, and we should not waste our time dealing and talking about definitions. And to acquire proper knowledge, we should seek other tools. And I'll discuss these when we come closer to the modern time. Okay. Let me move on and let me be a bit more. Let me see. Oh, sorry. I'm losing time. Socrates was against sophists. Therefore, he was against all types of relativisms, but because his field of interest was mostly morality and ethics, he was against moral relativism. He was against the claim that the man is the measure of all things. No, he was of the view that there are objective things out there to which all people can get access. And those objective measures could be shared by all of us. So no room for relativism. Those objective measures could be regarded as, say, moral principles. He was also, as mentioned before, very keen of finding about virtues. And he was of the view that a virtuous life is a life worth living. One of those major virtues, actually the major virtue for Aristotle, for Socrates. Remember, I told you that Socrates was of the view that because of ignorance, people move away from virtuous life or moral life. So the most important virtue for him was the virtue of acquiring knowledge. To the extent that you would strive to acquire knowledge, you would be regarded as a virtuous individual. But acquiring knowledge would enable you to find out about other types of virtues. Now, out of different types of knowledge, knowing yourself was of great significance, because by knowing yourself, you would better understand different potential latent in you, and you will be able to better and better develop it. And this is a very important, interesting saying by him, which has reached us: the unexamined life is not worth living. And by unexamined, he meant critically thinking about your own limitations and your ignorance. He himself was saying that he was the most ignorant individual in the whole of Athens. And because of that, he would go to experts to learn from them. But in doing so, and in applying his clever dialectical tactic, by putting those subtle questions to the experts, he would bring to their attention that they are not knowledgeable about what they're claiming. Okay. Socrates' ideas were further developed by his best disciple, because many of the Athenians, the brighter youngsters of Athens, and by brighter youngster I mean all aristocrats, were his disciples, and among them Plato was perhaps the most important disciple. By the way, Socrates was being accused by those, the power that be in Athens, of corrupting the youth. Of course, just like what happens nowadays, it was a trumpeted charge, political charge. And those who brought about that charge against him were hoping that They would frighten him, and either he would become silent or he would leave Athens. He didn't accept either, and the penalty was death by taking poison. And he said, okay, I should do so because I should act according to what I preach. So this has been documented in a fantastic literary way by Plato in one of the dialogues, which is called the Apology. And this is a very, very interesting reading. I strongly recommend to you to read that. The Apology by Plato is about the trial of Socrates and his final heroic act of drinking the poisonous chalice. Now, Socrates, Plato tried to further develop the ideas of his teacher. He was from a distinguished aristocratic family. By the way, aristocratic Athenians were not at all in favor of doing handiworks. They had plenty of slaves, and they were thinking that handiworks are just for slaves. And it is beneath them if they enter into some sort of practical activities. Their task, they were thinking foolishly that their task was just thinking intellectually and living in the clouds. At this, Plato was thinking something of interest and was developing some interesting ideas. He had some political ambitions, but then he was disillusioned by two things. First, the reign of 30 tyrants in Athens. Remember, Athens was a democracy. Of course, it was a democracy for just 5,000 well-to-do men, all men, no women and no foreigners, and of course, no slaves. And that democracy, that very primitive form of democracy, led to the emergence of some tyrants. One of the habits of the Athenians was that as soon as they would sense tyrannical tendencies in some individual, they would banish him. They would force him out of Athens. But because of some, if you like, decline in everything in Athens in later years, people managed to get power and stay in power. To some extent, it was because of the fault of the Athenian democracy itself. It became chaotic and disorderly, and this, just like what is happening in, say, America, and with gentlemen like Trump, making use of the chaos in the system, they made use of that and hold power and imposed some sort of tyrannical rule. That was too much for Plato. And to add insult to injury, they forced his beloved master and teacher, Socrates, to commit suicide. And that was that. He decided not to go back to politics at all. Okay, sorry about a bit of disharmony between these different parts of this slides. He decided to dedicate his life to teaching and training the students. He created his academy. This is the academy. And by the way, this map shows different schools in ancient Athens, including Lyceum, which was later on created by Aristotle. So, Okay, these are some of the works of Plato. Plato's writings could be divided into three parts. The earlier parts where Plato talks, Socrates talks, and these are mostly Socratic ideas himself. Then the middle dialogues, which are part Socrates, part Plato, and then his own later works, which are almost completely Plato himself. That you can find, for example, in his Republic and his The Laws, one of his latest works. But all of his writings are of great interest. In each of these dialogues, a number of people come together, and Socrates is there, and they start dialogue about something, and then Socrates usually lead them towards deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper layers of meaning. Each of these books deal with some particular aspects. So, for example, the Republic is mostly about Republic is sort of encyclopedia, but mostly about a political model for city-states. Timaeus is about cosmogony, about the origin of the universe. Sophist, the name represents itself. Menu is mostly about educational matters and so on and so forth. Euthyphro is about the notion of justice. Of course, then the notion of justice is also discussed again in the Republic, because here it remains undecided. Plato and others come to the conclusion that no, they do not know enough about justice. Okay. Now, remember those three cosmological questions? Plato tried to answer all three aspects of those cosmological questions. He was also influenced by all those who came before him. And as a result, he produced a complex theory in which metaphysics and epistemology were intertwined, and he introduced a number of important questions and a number of interesting answers. Now, the two main epistemological questions which he presented to his contemporary colleagues, which has reached us to this day, were first, the nature of knowledge. What is knowledge? And when someone makes a knowledge claim, can that individual justify his or her own claim? So the nature of knowledge, the whatness of knowledge. And the second one, how could we acquire knowledge? Now, this one is about our limitation. How us and the world should be to be able to acquire knowledge. This is exactly a question when centuries later, Immanuel Kant asked himself and tried to provide an answer. Plato also asked this same question, but you will notice that his answer is completely different from the answer which Immanuel Kant will give many centuries later on. Okay. He combined epistemology with metaphysics, and the central theme in his combined theory was this notion of idea. And the notion of idea is something which he tries to develop in depth and explore by means of different metaphors. Metaphor and analogies and allegories are tools which are extensively used by Plato to very good effect. Plato actually is one of the earliest philosophers who used this notion of thought experiment. Thought experiment is a very important theoretical tool used by philosophers to develop their ideas. Plato was one of the first philosophers used this particular intellectual tool in a professional manner. Now, here are some aspects of his epistemology. So he asked whether a person could justify his or her own claim. And he was also interested, as I told you before, in the definition of things. All of these three philosophers were thinking that by definitions, they will be able to get to the essences of things. Later on, he asked himself the question about the condition of acquiring knowledge. So earlier the first question and then the second question. He started to share his views in terms of different allegories or analogies or similes or metaphors. One is the following. I'm sure you have all heard about this, but let me share this video with you, if it works. So let me reject all and then see whether it works. So let's hope that it works.
Let me show in a parable to what extent my nature is enlightened.
We can't see or hear it.
We cannot see or hear anything, just your slide.
It seems someone saying to him what you saw before.
Sorry, let me pause. Are you watching the video or not?
No,
No, you're stuck on your slide.
No.
We
So
couldn't even.
why you didn't tell me before?
Yeah, we were
we've been
saying.
we've been saying, but it seems you were not able to hear us.
Okay, let me. All right, we are running out of time, but I want you to see this. Okay, let me go back and share this. Yeah, Plato's cave. Let me see whether it works. Can you see now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry about that.
The audio is very faint and almost not
No,
there.
it is faint. It is.
Can't hear anything actually from the.
Sorry, you don't see anything?
I can't hear anything from the video. I can hear your voice.
You can't hear from anything from the video. Sorry, let me see.
If there is a voice right now.
Okay, let's forget about the video. Go back to our slides. All right, let me just get rid of this. Okay, we are back on our slides. Can you see the slides?
We're still seeing the Chrome YouTube.
Okay, all right, so let me go back. Wow, this is very cumbersome. Okay, can you see the slides now?
Yes.
All right. Okay, so please keep me informed about changes. Let me very briefly tell you about this allegory of cave, because by allegory of cave, Plato is trying to sell to us his theory of knowledge. So what he wants to tell us is that people are in this life just like prisoners in a cave who are deprived of being able to go around and explore reality with all their different senses. Those prisoners in the cave are forced to just watch the world before them, and the only thing which they can see is that because at the back of the cave there is a fire burning out, and between the fire and the prisoners and the world before them, people are moving with different items carrying. Images of these people and these items are reflected, projected on the screen or on the wall before them, just like you are in a cinema theater. And because these prisoners have been there from the beginning of their lives, this is a thought experiment, so you should take it on trust. So they have seen nothing else but these images. Therefore, it is quite natural for them, Plato argues, that they conclude that reality is nothing but these images. And then one day, one of these prisoners is released miraculously, and he tried to go out of the cave. First, he encounters the fire and see the people, so he gets confused because so far he was thinking that only images are real. But now he is seeing something else. But gradually, if he persists, he realizes that these people are the source of those images. Then he goes out of the cave and come across more varieties of reality and becomes more and more knowledgeable. Then at the end, he comes face to face with the sun, which is the source of all lights and all enlightenments. Then he realizes that, okay, that was the really real thing. Then Plato says that the guy goes back, tries to convince his friends to come out, but they ridicule him and tell him that, no, you have gone mad and we no longer want to hear you. So this is basically Plato's theory of knowledge in a nutshell. Knowledge about what is material in this world is not genuine knowledge. It is only some sort of, if you like, these are the terms which you use, perception and opinion about transient appearances. And because they are appearances, they should not be relied upon. Knowledge is something completely different, and he tries to explain what he means by knowledge. So another theory which he introduces is the theory of recollection, anamnesis. And he claims that our souls, before coming to this world, were in another world in which they were face to face with real essences of things. So they had real knowledge of those things. Knowledge by encounter, knowledge by direct vision, not knowledge by concepts. So what Plato means by knowledge is knowledge direct, without any medium, without the medium of perception, without the medium of language. Our souls in that realm were fortunate enough to be knowledgeable about reality directly. But then our souls were ordered to come down from that realm into this realm, into the transient world, into material world. Unfortunately, there was a river between that realm and this realm, and the function of that river was that whoever would enter into it would forget about what he had learned before. So he or she would get amnesia. By the time we came to this world, we had completely forgotten about what we had already knew. So knowledge was not to be acquired, but to remembered, to be recollected. True knowledge could not be acquired by the testimony of senses, by our perceptions. What we could get by our perception is mere opinion. What we had was an innate type of knowledge. We had it before, but we forgotten about it. So here, as you can see, just like atomists, Plato makes a sharp distinction between reality and appearance. And realm of appearance is what we are in, or the state of prisoners in that cave. We need to get rid of that, those shackles, and come face to face with reality. Now, it is important for you to keep this in mind that Plato introduced two different conceptions of knowledge. One was the one which I just explained to you. The other one was some sort of understanding based upon opinion, doxa. Knowledge for him was episteme, and hence epistemology, theory of knowledge. Plato was saying that opinion themselves are not knowledge at all. Then he asked the question, what about true opinions? And then he said, no, true opinions is still not knowledge in the strict sense of the term. So, for example, suppose that you drive a car and your car has developed some fault with its batteries. You know, you have a conception about the fault, but you do not know the cause of that fault. So you cannot justifiably, according to Plato, tell us that you know everything about that fault. You just have a surface understanding, which is true. Yes, the car is faulty about the fault, but you do not have a deep understanding about the fault. So Plato introduced the following term, the following definition for knowledge, which has remained until today. And in my other classes, I explained to the students that it is very, very, very unfortunate. This has been a great disservice to our epistemic pursuits. And I'll explain to you why. Plato suggested that knowledge equals justified true opinions, justified true beliefs. So knowledge has got three elements. Remember, this is his second definition of knowledge. The three elements of this second definition are a belief, which should be true and should be justifiable. So he said, if someone claims that he can justifiably talks about a true belief, then that individual could be said to be knowledgeable about that claim. So a knowledge claim, which is justified true opinion, is regarded as proper knowledge in this second definition. But this proper knowledge, note that, has the element of perception, the element of opinion, the element of belief. And belief and opinions, in Plato's view, do not produce or contribute to genuine absolute knowledge. Genuine absolute knowledge is what you get in direct contact with reality, through direct observing of that reality and absorbing that reality. So this is knowledge in the, if you like, more accurate sense for Plato. So he said that absolute, indubitable knowledge is the one which you come face to face with. You encounter it directly. So direct knowledge without any medium of concepts or words or logic for justification. The second type of knowledge is rational knowledge, in which the element of justification, the element of reasoning in order to justify, produce arguments, is involved. Now, Plato also uses the term dialectic, and remember I told you that his use of dialectic is different from the use of Socrates. his teacher. For Socrates, it was a series of questions which are formulated in order to take out the proper answer from the guy who is being questioned. For Plato, questions in the dialectical encounter, application of dialectical method, were only used in order to help the guy to remember what he had forgotten. Because all knowledge is innate, is there. We have simply forgotten it. The art of a dialectician is to help people to remember what they have forgotten. In one of the delightful dialogues, Plato talks about a slave boy who is completely illiterate. Then, of course, Plato, Socrates is talking on his behalf. Socrates tells his companions that, look, this boy knows the axioms of geometry. And they look at him incredulously and tell him that, how come if this guy doesn't even, is not able to read? And then Socrates, by putting well-measured questions, step by step, help the boy to reconstruct axioms of geometry. Hence, Plato, talking through the mouth of Socrates, proves to his companions that, look, knowledge is all innate, it is all there. Now, Plato introduced the notion of forms. We have unfortunately exceeded the course of this session. I'm sorry, we are in the middle of Plato, and apparently we are missing one session. Anyhow, he introduced the theory of forms, and theory of forms is the link between his epistemology and his metaphysics. Forms or ideas or ideals are immutable entities which represent the ideal case of certain particulars. Each particular has its own form in which particulars participate. So particulars participate in creating those immutable ideal forms. Let me give you an example. Think about different shades of the color green. There are indefinitely many shades of the color green. Okay? Now, according to Plato, there is an ideal form of color green in which all these shades of green have participated and have helped to create it. That ideal type of green represents the form of the color green in our world. So there is a realm which is called the realm of forms. It's a metaphysical realm. Each form there represents an ideal of particulars of certain class in this world. Okay, let me stop here because it is now 8:10 and some of you may want to leave the session. I'm sorry about the delay, but no matter how quick I try to cover the things, we run out of time. Hopefully next time I take you to the end of Aristotle and beginning of the Christianity, and somehow try to make up for the lost time. Thank you for your patience. Inshallah, see you next week. In the meantime, please go to the webpage of the module. Would give me a day in order to put materials there, and then also remain in touch. Follow the instructions which I leave there for you, and make sure that you observe those instructions and participate in what I'm asking you to participate. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Paya. Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
So let me see whether I can.
Thank you, Sheikh.
All right, thank you so much.